Hello, welcome to my session. Oh no, undo configuration changes happened that I didn't want, and I need to go back. Well, the title that was on the program also included AI, but this talk is not about AI. Sorry for the clickbait. The thing is, in this session I will tell you how you can change the configuration to go back after you've done the accidental, thing with AI. Dries mentioned in this keynote that Drupal is ready for AI accidentally because we can revert things and stuff, and this is kind of what I'm talking about. But the primary focus is on recipes and Drupal CMS and to help beginners. Who is a beginner? Or no, nobody's a beginner. Then we can skip the whole talk. No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm Fabian Bircher. I'm a senior software engineer. I'm just Bircher on social media and on Drupal.org. I work for Nuvole. Nuvole has a distributed team across Europe, and our clients are mostly international organizations and institutions. And we are pioneers with configuration management. In fact, we've been doing this for more than 10 years now. I even have a slide from back then. So the kind of the premise that I want to talk about is kind of how recipes are awesome. But you already knew that. It's like not a recipe session as such, but they're a declarative way to bundle configuration changes, and it powers optional features of modern distributions. I don't know who knows from Drupal 7 distributions, and like they were nice, but also everyone who's maintained the distribution knows the pain. So the recipes were kind of invented to address this problem and kind of do what features did, but better, in the same way as features was used in Drupal 7 for configuration management, and then in Drupal 8 everything was better. At the beginning I had arguments with people, but I think now everybody agrees that it's nicer than it was before. The second thing is the Drupal CMS launcher, which just yesterday I was in a session where people were talking about this, and in the session of Christiane and Pam, that front-end developers can just use this to get Drupal running and like not bother with any of the setup that us backend developers are more familiar with. And Dries showed off this AI which configures site. You can just ask the chatbot, hey, add me a new content type and add fields and everything, and they will just do that. But if you do this, then you don't know where these changes are usually made. If you're not familiar with the Drupal user interface, like having a field created or all of this, you don't know how to undo this. You don't know where the buttons are to, or you can't see all of the changes that happen, even though the AI may have been telling you all the things it did, and it did something else. So why am I talking to you about this? We've solved this ages ago. That the tools are exactly the same as they were back in the days. You do configuration export, you add it to Git, you commit it, and if you want to go back, you revert to that commit and you import the configuration again. And it's just as it was before. And if that's not enough, you do database dump and you restore the database dump. So it's not, there's nothing new as such. Like these tools help, and they're great at this. But and even like with DrupalCon Amsterdam 2014, we had a training with Nuvole, and like on the cheat sheet, the exact commands are there, and they're still the same. They have a colon now instead of a dash, but they're still exactly the same things. One other thing that I don't know if everybody knows, but if you use DDEV, which is now the recommended way to develop with Drupal or to get set up, I think it's used on the first-time contributors sprints and stuff. It has a really cool feature called the DDEV Snapshot and DDEV Snapshot Restore, which does the database stuff for you. And it's compatible with even with servers that use the same tools. So you could restore like production database this way as well. So bypassing kind of the Drush way of doing things, just database. So that's great. But this is supposed to be a beginner session. Now, before I asked how many are beginners, nobody said that they're beginners. So if you're all familiar with CLI and Drush and Git and DDEV, then like this is not going to influence how you work in the future. Like, because you're probably still going to use Drush and these things because you're familiar with them and they work great. But I hope that you're still taking away some of the cool things that happened in Drupal in the last, I guess, years, 1 year, 2 years, something like that. And it will still show you some of the cool things that went into Drupal as kind of a hidden, a hidden feature, so to say. And this hidden feature is called configuration checkpoints. I don't know how many of you know or heard about configuration checkpoints? No? Yes? One? Configuration checkpoints are really cool, I think, because when recipes were added to Drupal core as part of the huge patch that went into core, one of the kind of requirements that it was supposed to fulfill was that if a recipe fails to apply, it automatically reverts the things that it already changed. So that if it can't complete itself, then at least it will not like leave broken pieces around. And for that, the configuration checkpoints system was added, and in the application of the recipe, if it fails, it will automatically import the configuration from that checkpoint. And I maintain config split and I maintain config ignore, and I made the configuration management API that is in Drupal 9 or Drupal 8.8, I think it was, that we added, that allowed all of this to work. So it like all of this is configuration storages and configuration storage transformations. And the recipes use the same classes, just much more complicated logic behind it, but it's the same interfaces. And so I was like, well, that doesn't need to be a hidden feature. We can make a UI module. And there was after the dev days in Leuven now, earlier this year, when I had conversations with people in the hallways, and I was like, well, we could just make a UI, but nobody was going to make a UI. And I was like, well, I think knowing all of this API, I shouldn't be too hard. And it turns out not to be too hard if you only use the API from core. And if you want to do more, then it's hard. But luckily, I mean, the API in Drupal core is not set in stone. We can add things to it. So the new module just exposes the API to the UI, to Drupal users that want to click around and not mess with the internals of PHP or the internals of Drupal core. You can add a checkpoint through the UI, and you can import a configuration of a checkpoint through the UI. The same way the recipe system uses the checkpoint API. You cannot edit a checkpoint, or you cannot merge checkpoints together yet. So something, because there is even, like after I created the module, there was someone that heard about it, or I don't know, but he came and was like, oh, this is cool, and tried it out, and was like, I can't edit this. Why? Like, this seems to be such a simple feature. And yes, the edit form is not complicated, but if we wanted to edit these, we would have to go into the core API and change things, because the core API doesn't allow editing the checkpoints. Because for the use case it had, it didn't need that. But we can add more of that, of course. It's just patches to Drupal core and getting through the whole process. And but if people are interested in that, then there's a way to do that. It's just the UI module is kind of constrained in a lot of ways, unless we want to go and do internal stuff that we can't rely on because it's not part of the API. Yeah. It's very standard form, it's table. I'm not a UI designer or anything, so it doesn't look very pretty, but it looks kind of the same as a standard Drupal interface, I think. So happy with that. When you revert a checkpoint, for everyone who has imported configuration through the UI, it looks exactly the same because it uses the same code. So nothing complicated there. It even shows you the diff, so that it works the same way. This, yeah, shouldn't be surprising. This looks a bit a lot, but this is the other UI. So if you're using Drupal CMS and the themes that come with it, it looks a little bit different. It comes from a different site, so it has different names. But you can see the project browser also creates checkpoints before it applies a recipe. So if you use project browser and you click install a recipe, even if your checkpoints UI module is not installed, it will create checkpoints. Like the UI module only exposes it. It doesn't. It's not necessary for there to be checkpoints. So if you've applied a recipe, or if you've applied a recipe via the project browser, you will have checkpoints on your system. You just don't know about it. Or maybe you do, but now you do. And they're just there. And if you have this UI module, you can revert the checkpoints. And this is how it looks. The import button is up in the corner, as the save button is for these kind of forms in this theme. I added an additional kind of help, or I don't know. I wanted to make the checkpoints more useful. So if you want to go back, but you don't want to revert everything, because at the moment you can't merge checkpoints either. But if you're comfortable with Git, you can still get this old configuration since it's there already. So like you don't have to have the UI module to have the checkpoint, but if you do, then you can export to the sync storage, and it should be safe, and it probably works, unless you use one of my modules that changes things. So for example, config split or config ignore, they change the way configuration is exported. That's what they do, that's their use case. And it does this too. So this follows through the same thing, but config ignore, and that it uses the kind of you can change the configuration that it uses to what to ignore, and then it's not from the moment necessarily when this was done. So you can configure it to not work. Like, I don't want to say it will just work, because it could not. But most of the cases, it probably will. So, I mean, I don't want to promise it works completely. In all my tests it did, but I didn't do weird edge cases, and a lot of people come to my modules and open issues with edge cases that I never thought of, which is fine, but I don't want to promise here in a session, it just works, and then people come and it doesn't, because I already know that this is a way that it can, it can get complicated. And another important thing also with config split and config ignore, when you import the configuration from a checkpoint, none of the config split things happen. They're not involved, because config split and config ignore, they work or they interfere with this process on the import and export of the configuration to the sync storage, but not from the active configuration back into the active configuration, which is what the import from a checkpoint is, because a checkpoint mirrors exactly the active configuration as it was when the checkpoint was taken. So I didn't introduce any more knobs to turn and fiddle with and mess with the system. But of course, as with importing configuration, as like we've been doing for 10 years and more, there are circumstances that can prevent you from importing the configuration. And it usually doesn't happen in a normal development process, but because reverting to a checkpoint often means removing things, it's more likely that it will not work. And the reason is, probably the most common reason will be the existing content prevents uninstalling the content type that provides or like is underlying the content. And so if it's the same, like you're developing a site and the client says, we don't need this content type anymore, you can't just remove that content type. You have to remove first all the content in an update hook, so that the configuration change that removes the content type can be imported. And since it's exactly the same system, it inherits all of the same limitations as well. I've talked yesterday with people that were basically the people that put the recipe system in core, and they were like, adding this UI creates a lot of more edge cases for this kind of things to happen. And there's possible improvements that we can do. We could, for example, track all of the content that the recipes add, and so we could have like recipe undo that removes the content. But as often with Drupal, the system is kind of yours, and there's so many ways things can interfere with each other that there will always be edge cases. So actually, I have tried this out. I created I applied in this site. I applied the case studies recipe. It created the case studies recipe checkpoint. Then I wanted to revert the case studies recipe, and I was like, configuration import failed because of the validation, and the following reason: the entity exists for the content, and the content entities exist for the case study content type, and you need to delete them before importing. And you can see also the UI module also created a checkpoint before reverting. In this case, reverting to that checkpoint would do nothing because it's already the same state. So if you revert to kind of the last checkpoint and no configuration has changed, it's as if the sync storage and the active storage of your site were the same, and it just says like there's nothing to import. But of course, if like there's more, then it will go back. And also, if you create a checkpoint and there's no difference to the previous checkpoint, it will not create a checkpoint. They will say like, it's the same. Like, why do you want to create a new one? They're the same. Like, they exist already. That's part of the API also. Like Drupal, the Drupal API will not create a new checkpoint if you ask it to create a new checkpoint when there is no changes. Yeah. Also, I don't have a slide for that, but like all of these, they have a download, the drop down. Allows you to delete the checkpoints. But because of the way the checkpoint default implementation of the checkpoint system in core works, this is linear checkpoints, and they build on top of each other. So you can delete the last one, or you can delete, if you delete the second to last one, it will delete everything before as well. And so if you delete the first one, it will delete all of them. So yeah, you cannot just only delete this one. Because only deleting this one would be merging the two, and that's not supported yet. So, but that's like a future improvement for the checkpoint API. It's definitely possible, and it just if you look at the code of this system, it needs you need a moment to wrap your head around it and find out like what is going on, because it's very clever in that it only saves what it really needs to. So the checkpoints themselves are pretty sparse, and they check what is in the checkpoint before until they find, like in the whole linear history, what to read from, and this, it's very cool. But then when you merge it, you need to find two checkpoints and delete from one of the checkpoints what shouldn't be there, and so it's and also needs lots of tests, of course, because so I don't think anyone started. There's an issue already since the beginning, since the system was made, that this should be allowed, but then that was not considered to be necessary to be implemented for the whole recipe system to go into core. So it's not a blocker, and then the people that were working on it said, okay, not a blocker, we can come to this later, and nobody came to it yet. I think if people start using the checkpoints more and find it useful, I think it should be no problem to do this. I'm sure Alex Pott would be happy to merge this. He was one of the people together with Fena Proxima to make this all work. And at the same time, maybe on a higher level, kind of a recipe revert operation, which does more, because the recipes, they change configuration, but they can also add content. So if you think about like the system as a stack, the configuration checkpoints are not part of the recipe system. The recipe system uses the checkpoint system to create this backup mechanism. So the checkpoints themselves know nothing about recipes. And so if we want to revert recipes, we need to build something on top of recipes. And this module that I created and the API underlying it, they're completely like detached from recipes, sort of. They're building on something on the side of what is used in the foundation of how recipes work. And of course, recipes are the foundation of Drupal CMS and all the other side templates that are being talked about in other sessions. Now I've already shown you that I was using the Drupal launcher or the Drupal CMS trial. I wanted to show you this because it's a really quite a simple way to get the Drupal running. So I think more and more, especially new people to Drupal or people that want to evaluate how Drupal works, will go this route. I use Linux, so I can only tell you my experience about the Linux build, and or initially there was some problem, but it works great now. So and I use it to evaluate or play around with the Drupal CMS, and to see what people are building and to know what's going on. And the Drupal CMS launcher is, because it's a standalone application, has interesting opportunities and restrictions compared to like a standard Drupal, because the standard Drupal you can run everywhere, and like the system cannot make any assumptions about what you're doing with it. But here it knows it runs on your laptop, and it doesn't have a database other than SQLite, and the PHP version and composer and everything is bundled into the application. And so when you download it and run it, it looks like this. Once it's done, at the beginning it will like have like a spinner where it does all the things in the background. It does composer install and install the dependencies, and everything sets up everything in your file system somewhere. And then it tells you visit the site, because it exposes HTTP port on your system, and you can go to localhost. In my case, it's the 8888, and you can browse your website. And the first time I tried this, I was trying to imagine me being at the university and trying Drupal for the first time, and it felt really magic because I remember what I had to do to get Drupal running at the time. And I was like, oh, now I need to do this and this, just like click, and wow. And it's really like, I'm like senior Drupal engineer, and I'm excited about this because I can see how this is a window for a lot more people to experience Drupal. But then you don't know the file structure of Drupal and where to find all of the things, and you can't revert easily the same way. I mean, you can do the checkpoint UI too, but because it's SQLite, you can do the DDEV snapshot thing, theoretically. So, it turned out more than one evening, but the idea was also born in Dev Days, on one of the evenings, and it was like, we can just copy the database file because we can, and that part is actually very easy. And you can. So I built a module called SQLite Backup that can copy over the file of the Drupal database and make a copy of it, and that was great because it's just a file on the file system where Drupal already knows it can write to, because it can write to the database and it can upload images there. Restoring the backup is much more complicated because, I mean, it's not complicated if you do it by hand, because you just rename the file and you have the old backup, the old database again, and Drupal, when you reload the page, it'll be like, oh, you know, that's the other database, and all the caches are from the old database, and nothing wrong. But this is a UI module, and it does it in the UI, and therefore in Drupal, and so you have to revert the database while Drupal is running. So it's a little bit more complicated. I managed to make it work most of the time, or all the time so far, since I developed it, to work in the Drupal launcher. So, but I've seen it corrupt the database so often that I don't feel ready yet to tell the Drupal CMS team, like, hey, you need to put this into Drupal CMS. It works, and I think people. I want to encourage people to try it out. I don't want to say it will definitely result in a corrupted database. But it happened to me while developing it, so I don't want to promise that it can never happen. Yeah. It has essentially the same UI because it's just a form where you enter the name and you create it, and it creates a list of the backups, and you can revert them and you can delete them. And the interesting part about this is because it's metadata about the database backup. If you revert to the other database backup, the other newer ones wouldn't be there anymore. So the database, metadata about the databases cannot be in the database. Otherwise, like, you would revert all the metadata about it too. So this survives because it's saved in a file next to the database. It survives reverting the database. And so these keep around until you delete them manually. And yeah, it's I think if some of you help and try it out as well, and we find more ways it can fail, and we iron out all of these bugs, I think it could be really a nice addition to the Drupal CMS launcher. Maybe for sure not to the Drupal CMS that people want to deploy, because you should not deploy SQLite to production. I know people do that for reasons, but if you do, don't use this module on production. Because reverting the database means Drupal forgets everything it knows about anything, and it means that especially your user session is also may not be valid anymore. It works great if you create a backup, don't log out, and revert to the backup. Because the user session is still the same, it works. But if you log out and log in again, then the user session is not the same anymore, and so then the user session you have in your browser and the user session that's saved in the database don't match, and you're not logged in anymore. So there's not really anything that we can do to work around this, other than telling you before you do it, and then helping you to log in again and complete the process. Because there's also some caches that could be mismatched, because some things are saved in the browser still, like the session. So you need to actually not only clear the caches, as it's written here, but also run update hooks, because the database backup could be from a point where the code was in an older state than it is now when you revert the backup. So we need to also run the update.php after the backup is restored, to bring the backup database back into line with the current code version. And now I've been talking, and I think, I want to just add a disclaimer. I already said it before. Don't use it in production. It will work if the code base has an upgrade path to where from the database to where you are now. If you take a database backup from a different site that has modules installed that you currently don't have anymore, and it doesn't have you don't have in your code update path to remove them, it will not work. The same way you cannot just take the database from one site and import it in another site, without any issues. So, yeah. I think I need to write this somewhere on the module page too, because but the expectation is that you run it on your Drupal launcher, and then in this environment, the Drupal you will have downloaded probably the same modules again. But if you clear I think that was the last slide. So on the Drupal launcher, there's like this button that like this one opens the files to the Drupal files in your file browser, file I don't know what's called. Explore, yes. And this one, the trash button, trashes your site completely. And like it's just gone and start from scratch. It's great if something doesn't work anymore. You can just be like, okay, I don't know how to get it back to working. You can just like, bam, gone, everything. Start vanilla again, start from scratch. And the other tools that I brought you closer to, and now in this session, they help you to kind of do this in between. So you can restore either a database backup, or you can restore a configuration snapshot to get back to where you were just a moment ago. Yeah, the other last kind of thing that I wanted to add here is also that it currently doesn't do anything automatic other than the recipe system and project browser creating snapshots before they apply a recipe or before applying a recipe through project browser. But you have to create the backup yourself before going and playing with I don't know, new AI tools or whatever you want to explore. So it's because we were talking about especially the SQLite backup. If we should do it like on a regular basis, like once a day we create a backup or something, but once a day may not be often enough, or it might be too much. I don't know. If you have opinions or thoughts after having checked it out, then I'm very welcome for feedback, and we can make it better, so that people that are new to Drupal can have a better experience. And I think, thank you. There's still time for questions, I think. I don't know how long, but yeah, go ahead.
I just want to clarify, did I understand properly that also the restore is not automated? So basically that update process, that needs to be invoked manually then afterwards. So you just restore the database, and if the code base is then different, then I need to run Drush update TV or something?
No.
Okay.
So, I mean, yeah, so I don't know if the recording caught your question, but as I understood this, is the thing automatic? And it is to the extent I can make it automatic. So when you click restore the database, it will restore the database and redirect you to update it.
Okay.
So you have to click that run updates button, and the idea is there is no drush. Like, But the update.php. So the idea is you get redirected to update.php, and actually we were talking yesterday about like what we can make better to even further reduce the possibility that the database gets corrupted, because I think it's because of concurrency. So with BigPipe and it writing to caches, and then there's some of the services in their shutdown function, they write to the database, and if the database is not there anymore, it creates a new one and then writes it, and that's so there's weird cases where so basically when you revert the database backup, Drupal cannot touch it anymore. Otherwise, it will write to the database things that was meant for another file, and that corrupts the file, and then Drupal is cooked. It's like nothing works anymore.
It could even just be like a cache entry that's written.
Yeah, exactly. Anything. And I tried my best to prevent it, and on the launcher, so far it never happened anymore. But on my Umami side, it did. And so, like, that's why I'm so cautious, and I'm telling you, it's not. But we talked yesterday with Catch, and he was like, well, just make another like front-end controller that does nothing, like update.php, except really what you want to do. And I was like, actually, yeah, I should have thought of that before. that would make so much more sense. And then from there we can do kind of like the updates as well. Not automatically, but we can see if we need to redirect to the updated PHP or just like the cache clear function. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a question more about the checkpoints.
Microphone?
Yes.
Thank you. I've got a question about the checkpoints. You said that the database were stored in files, but what about the checkpoints? Is it stored in
the database?
In the database.
Yes.
And does it take a lot of place to store these stack of checkpoints? Could it be a problem at some points?
Like, I don't think so, because the whole active configuration is also saved in the database, and the checkpoints save only what changed. So they're like, each checkpoint is as sparse as it can get, and the checkpoints kind of layered on top, they only save what is changed in them. So like, in the worst case scenario, you change everything, and so this becomes the same size as what you already have in the database, and you change it a second time, and then it can grow. Yes. The other thing with the checkpoints, and I think core needs to do this somehow, is that when you run update hooks, then basically the checkpoints become invalid, because you cannot go back with the configuration to the code that doesn't match it anymore. It's a long-standing issue, and I think it's probably also 10 years old by now, that tries to prevent you from importing the configuration if it doesn't match the version of the code base. Basically, like the version of the update hook or the post-update hook that you had, which could change the configuration or do things. And it's kind of the same here. And I think either we add it to the UI module, or tell you, like, update hooks have been run, and therefore checkpoints below this is probably not safe anymore. But because anything can happen in update hook, we don't know. Maybe it's still good, maybe not. And if we remove it, maybe you would want to keep it because it's still safe, but maybe not. So I don't know. Like, I don't know what's the right decision to make.
And just another one question, just to be sure I understood what you said. The checkpoints are automatically created when we use the UI module in the browser, but it means that if I apply a recipe from Drush, there's no checkpoint.
No, that's exactly the point. The Drush and Drupal CLI, they create the checkpoints whether you have the UI module or not. Like, you might already have checkpoints on your system, and you just don't see them because you don't have a UI for it, and you're not aware that they're created in the first place.
But it means that if I install the module, I will find...
Yeah, if you install a module, you will find all of the ones you have. Yes. The ones from before, there is a small... I lied a bit when I said I don't do any of the configuration transformation. I do a little bit because I keep the UI module installed. So if you revert to a checkpoint from before you installed the UI module, it will keep the UI module installed. Like, it will not uninstall it, because that would break the user experience. It would be like, redirect to a route that doesn't exist anymore. So I was like, maybe not so good. So it will keep the checkpoint UI installed even if you revert to a checkpoint from before it was installed. Yes. It will tell you in the UI that it will uninstall it, but it will not. Or I don't know if it still tells you that. Yeah.
I also have a question regarding Drush. You showed that your UI can create a checkpoint manually.
Mm-hmm.
That gives me the wish, do I also can use a Drush command to make a checkpoint manually? Because when I see something as a developer in the front end, I think it's cool and nice when I use it one or two times.
No, that's a great idea.
The next time I want to have it as a Drush command.
Yeah.
And when I think of testing something on a project.
Yeah, I mean, there is currently, as far as I know, there's currently no drush command for that. It would be quite easy to add one because all you need to do is get the service and call create checkpoint on it.
Give it a label.
Yeah, exactly. You pass in a label as the argument to the create checkpoint, or I forgot exactly the name of the method. But yeah, it's very, very simple. So if you do, you can create checkpoints now with drush if you just do drush f like the eval and call the service to create a checkpoint. Not the great user experience,
Yeah.
you know. But like it's yeah. I
It
don't.
would be nice, I think.
Huh?
New module. If core doesn't have it,
Yeah.
I think it would be nice if you module.
Yeah. No.
Okay.
Absolutely. I would be. Yeah. And we can definitely add it to this module. That I don't have any qualms about it. That's a great idea. Yeah. It makes sense. I don't know how many questions we can still have, but I probably.
Last one.
Yeah. But you can also approach me afterwards. I'm happy to talk about this.
So one question to the config split.
Yeah.
You mentioned. Sorry for that.
No worries.
You mentioned it works kind of. It's config split, but I wasn't sure if that works also if you, for example, add or remove the splits after making the backups and you restore.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly where it can get complicated. So if you have a checkpoint before the split existed, and you export it, and like it will not contain the split, so it will export it as if the split didn't exist. But I'm not sure if the split still doesn't want to split things. If my memory is correct, because the split configuration is taken from the configuration that is being tried to do the transformation. So, like it's not there, and therefore it shouldn't do anything. So, I think should be safe. But there's an edge case I haven't tested, and there be dragons.
I was just wondering
Yeah.
if that was tested or not.
Yeah. I mean, test it and tell me if it works.
Okay.
I don't know how much I can do about it, but yeah. Yeah, thank you very much.